I think when you devote your life to something, whether that's a hobby, a career, or what a lot of us say is a calling, I don't think you notice just how much you collect from that thing until one day you're just faced with the heft of it. This is 17 years of me being in spoken word poetry. This is the composition book I read from that very first time I stepped on stage in 2002. I was going through this the other day and looking at all the poems that I wrote, but back then I would write every day, man. Every day I was writing. And I didn't care much about style. I would just, whatever it was I was feeling and needed to express, I just wrote it down. So I think you have to honor that stage when you really didn't care much about how you sound or what style you have. You knew that there was this energy inside you, these emotions inside you, and you just needed to get them down on paper somehow and release them. Yeah. This is the scrapbook I made. This was before internet. Here's some stuff that I had, um, that I collected from my first competitions, the state competition, regional competition, and national competition. I was collecting every spoken word flyer I was getting just because I wanted to know what was going on around my town. I did a workshop at a high school. It's funny because I'm friends with some of them now. I see them on Facebook. They have their own families and they have their own careers, and they still tell me that they still remember, being in high school and learning about spoken word poetry. My first feature. And I remember watching HBO Def Poetry when I first started, and I was like, man, it'd be cool if one day I got on there. And then in 2006, I got the call to be on the show. I was so nervous, so nervous. It's a big deal. I started touring colleges after that. All these hotel key cards, all these flights, over 900 colleges. I don't know, I think I could still learn more though. I don't feel like I've reached the pinnacle of what else I could discover with this craft. I may not want to tour as much anymore. I may not want to be on the road as much anymore, but I know that spoken word still has a lot to give in other avenues. And I hope I can explore that. I want to continue always being a student to this thing. What if I told you that somewhere in this world, every night of the week, somebody is being bold enough to stand in front of a microphone to unleash their innermost thoughts, to tell their most sacred stories to a room full of people willing to listen? This is not your average poetry reading. This is something more. My name is Asia Sampson, and for the past 13 years, I've made my living as a touring spoken word poet. A passion that turned from hobby to career, it has taken me to places I've never imagined going. I've lost count on how many stages I've stood on, from grand theaters to makeshift living rooms, with audiences ranging from 3,000 to just 3. And yet somehow, I still don't think I've scratched the surface of how deep this art form goes. I feel like there is so much more I could learn, so many more answers I can unearth about this craft that I cherish so sincerely. So I'm hitting the road again. But this time it's not to perform. I want to meet with all the poets I've admired throughout my career, to find out what poetry means to them, to understand the madness that makes them want to express their most vulnerable selves to an audience of strangers, to discover how they learn to weave thoughts and emotions into a tapestry of words in an attempt to define their own version of truth over and over again. And who knows, maybe through them, I'll find what I've been searching for.
What does poetry mean to me?
I feel like you can't ask a poet what is poetry without them having an existential crisis.
I think I've always thought of poetry as the vessel of those things that you can't say in real life, but then you actually end up saying them.
It's this way of bringing to an audience a truth I don't believe everybody's a poet, because then it's not special if everybody can do the shit.
Poetry is not just the poetic form printed or typed. It's also a whole conversation that's being created about the time that I was on this planet.
It's a language or a dialect that we're constantly developing with reaction to the world, as well as like with our own input into the world that we're trying to create.
It's putting a lens on everything that makes almost anything tolerable.
I am not here to say what poetry is or is not. There's a point of connection in everything. And if people are connecting those dots, it's poetry enough.
I feel like when you ask what is poetry, it becomes this like bubble of a genre, and it becomes this bubble of this like underground, unknown, kind of like almost inaccessible realm. Whereas if you take the poetic spirit, it transcends all types of professions, socioeconomic classes, whatever types of people, and it becomes more about the spirit of interconnectedness and interdependence and like just the harmony of life.
You know, when my grandma passed away, she was a seamstress, and she was the most creative person I ever knew growing up. And when she died, I inherited her thimbles. And when I got them in the mail, I would put one on each finger and like start typing with her thimbles on my fingers.
Poetry is a form of storytelling.
Honest storytelling.
To me, it's a story. Everything's a story.
Before we had television, before we had radio, before there was internet and all of these things, that's what people did. They sat around this person who was really, really good at telling a story. And that was, the entertainment.
A big part of why I love stories, because I think that they're so useful for helping people to understand the world around them.
This was sometimes the only way that I could say like the truest things in my heart.
I think it's how my heart most understands what's happening. It's my heart's truest language.
Whether it's written, whether it's the way you live your life, whether it's the way you dress. Yeah, poetry is poetry.
We're so numb and think that our lives are mundane because it is habitual. We don't understand that is a poem too.
It's so many moments of intimate human contact and showing compassion and love for each other that I think we take for granted sometimes until we don't have it anymore. And when you don't have it is when you realize this life is hella short. And we only have so much time to be the best people we can. So for me, poetry is being the best person that you can.
Someone that carries the poetic spirit is someone that truly, despite all of the agony and suffering and pain in the world, that one is still able to summon the courage to continue to live bravely, to continue to live with love, and to continue to spread that spirit upon others.
But even in that work, I think it's more service than it is anything. I consider myself a servant to the people that I perform to.
It's therapeutic, yes. It's healing, yes.
It's just life to me.
It's a balm, yes.
It's a dirty mirror.
Blow the world up, yes.
But it's gotta be authentic.
It's all of these kind of things, but it's still to put together, to mend and to bring together, to weave.
It becomes less about writing, it becomes less about performing, and becomes more about the way you live, the way you think, the way you interact with other people.
Right, we had this divine choice about ourselves.
It's evidence to me that there is no art form more divine than spoken word. Don't exist.
It's going inside your soul and pulling it out. And then watching it bloom together, and then getting on stage and releasing it to the world so they can take it and do whatever they want with it. Because your poem is your butterfly, like a monarch butterfly migrating into the hearts and minds of everyone that you touch. How's that?
Yo.
What's going on, man?
All right, so like a few years ago, well, 10 years ago, we introduced music to the poetry, and so I was just sitting here thinking about what else we can do to kind of take our show to the next level. So I have some ideas here for you: poetry and interpretive dance, poetry with lasers, poetry and ventriloquism, poetry telemarketing. We would just call random phone numbers and just start spitting poems to people when they pick up.
Why do you torture me?
You're my manager. You're supposed to support everything that I come up with.
Please give me like a real idea. You're not just calling me and messing with me today.
We have NACA conferences coming up. We only get 10 minutes to showcase now, right? And every time we have a new conference, we're always like, we're always struggling to figure out which poems we're going to do, because it's either we do 2 poems with a lot of setup for each poem, but then that's not enough poems to give people, or we're doing 3 poems and it just feels rushed because we're trying to all fit it in 10 minutes. What if I just write like a 10-minute poem? It'll basically be like a really miniature one-man play. It'll have comedy. It'll have, emotional parts that might make people cry, and then it'll also be inspirational.
I mean, it's definitely brave. I have all the faith in the world that you'll be able to structure this in a way that, number one, will be amazing, and it'll be an experience. I think that's the biggest key for you, is making it not feel like it's 10 minutes. Writing, writing it well enough where it doesn't feel like it's 10 minutes.
We do have a couple shows with button poetry, and then we have So Far Sounds, where I think I can practice this poem in front of those audiences before we actually take it to conference,
Right, and it'll be good because those will be solid, like testing.
Right? Yeah, it will be. So no to the ventriloquism.
He was like my uncle, one of my father's best friends. I might have been in elementary school, and they would smoke their little herb, and he would say, come read one of your perms. That's what they would call it, right? Come read one of your perms. And he said one time, and I'll never forget it, he said, listen, these pieces, he didn't say pieces, these perms need to be like a woman's dress. Long enough to cover the topic, but short enough to make it interesting. So, I was in elementary school, you understand?
My great grandfather was a preacher. I was raised in a church and all that too. And I was raised in church until they tried till the deacon tried to kidnap my mother. He actually tried to. It's a long story.
I remember when I was a kid and I was just trying to find the words to say with all the thoughts that was going on in my head, and I just was starting to write all the things down, and my parents were always like, you're always scribbling in that notebook, like what are you doing in that thing?
I was such a mediocre guitar player and singer, which is how I started in college. And then I found out about slam and realized I don't have to torture people with my singing guitar playing anymore, and I can just rock my lyrics, which is what I really have confidence in.
I didn't even know spoken word was a thing or existed.
I didn't know this world existed.
I knew that it was this thing that existed out there. I actually had a good friend named Jamar Williams. We lived in the dorms together. We would walk to dinner every day together, right? And he said he met a guy in one of his classes that did this.
I was maybe 16, and my dad took me to a spoken word poetry show, a slam, and he actually competed with a poem about hunting, which was mortifying.
I remember telling him, I so wish I could do that. We should find where that is and go seek it out.
I said, I can think of nothing that I would rather not do than go hear people recite poetry.
My homeboys said that there were cute girls there, so we went.
That night they were giving away tickets to the world premiere of a movie called Slam by this guy named Saul Williams. I don't know if you've heard of him.
When I walked into that place, it was literally like a sanctuary for me. And I remember saying to myself in my head, like, this is church. This is where I'm supposed to be every week.
The amount of people who were coming to this particular venue had grown so much that doors opened at 8 o'clock. If you weren't there by 8:30, you couldn't get in the building.
It was super packed. It was like all these heavy hitters that were in the city. They were just like, I'm going to the show. Like nobody missed the show.
All the seats were filled. There were people sitting on the floor in front of the stage, people standing all along the bar.
Like just so loud and like all over the place, like moving through the crowd and yelling and standing on a bookcase.
I was like, oh damn, like there really are no rules. It's just whatever we want it to be.
Oh, you can say whatever the hell you want. I could do that.
And when I first heard it, I was like, what is this?
Whatever that talking is, I gotta learn how to talk like that. I gotta learn how to do that.
I think I was surprised. I was like, oh shit, someone's telling a story. And people are going, oh.
That's when I was like, this shit is dope.
I thought, oh, that's poetry? Oh, I'm on that shit. Like now, I'm doing that tomorrow. And dead ass, I went and wrote up 2 poems within the next 48 hours.
After a couple of times of going to this event and seeing people perform, I started to feel like, man, hey, I can do this.
And I thought to myself in that moment, I think maybe there's a possibility I can do this.
I was really, really struggling early in high school for a lot of different reasons. And actually had a suicide attempt that landed me in the hospital.
I was at a point in my life where I had no spouse, lost my house, lost my job. And it was the first time I really had no direction. I didn't know what I liked. I didn't know what I loved. I didn't know who I was anymore.
Being in a dark place, I had not communicated anything that I was feeling to anybody. So it was all bottled up inside myself.
At that point, I was using my poetry to run away from everyone in the world, and I didn't know how to. It was my escape and my way to be me. And going to that open mic was the first time I saw people who looked like me, kind of like bringing their story into the world. And I was just so inspired because I was like, I thought this is how I hide from everyone, and you mean there's a community for this?
You know, that week I had already decided. I had already written the letter. You know, I wanted to kill myself because I was just going through a whole lot. And I just, at 18 years old, I couldn't handle it. And they affirmed me. Like people I looked at and was like, wow, there's somebody like me in the world. I'm not alone. And they affirmed me and encouraged me and strengthened me and told me how amazing I was. And they made me want to live.
I used to, when I told this story, would try to cookie cutter it and say like, and that's how I then, you know, got into recovery, and that's, you know, what, but I won't say that poem wasn't what made me recover, but it's what made me think that someday I wanted to, that I didn't want to always be sick.
Come through, eyebrows. Yes, highlight. I see you grayed out. I have posted another selfie on Facebook, and Black women are doing what they do best, making me feel more visible than I have ever been, and I say lean in. Yes. Let me tell you of a wall-less church, a congregation of women in the business of saving. Women given the trash and the broken, yet refuse to think you disposable. Women who do the heavy lifting while the world gawks from the sidelines. Women serving as a second womb for motherless children, for grown-ass men intent on not doing their own emotional work, and we let you bask in the greatness. That is, should you be so lucky to be granted this magic, because we might side-eye you the kingdom come. Might roll our eyes until you poof and disappear, and ain't that sorcery? The way our defenses protect us from the elements, from a winter of the undeserving, intent on getting all of our harvest, and you so vain you think we do this for you. As if we wake up in the morning pandering to the world's gaze. As if Black aunties have nothing better to do than to raise children that aren't theirs. As if the women of Alabama and Wakanda ain't have shit else to do than to tend to save men from themselves. Lean in. They saved themselves first, and you got saved in the process, and ain't that the way it always goes? We get dressed in all the work we do, and you are saved just by touching the hem of our garments. Black queer women create social justice movements, and you make it about the men, oblivious to their own privileged men who demand we be Black first and woman only when it suits them. Our intersectionality is an inconvenient myth. Misogyny is a weed that grows back no matter how many blackly think pieces you spray on it. The trouble with being a savior, though, is that people don't usually think you need saving. They don't think you need gentleness. To the women, I say I vow to be more gentle with you. Know that you are worthy of someone who helps you with the work. Too long we have dined with the world, serving food from our own gardens, on tables that we bought and built. All that I have I owe to Black women. And when I hear a woman speak ill of Black women, I think of the girl I used to be, trying so hard to be one of the boys. I'm still forgiving myself for all the times I saw a wound or a mirror instead of a sister, but here I say I'm sorry. I say glory to the women who thought I was worth saving. Glory to the women who think I'm enough, even on days when I fall short. To the women in this room, I say, come through eyebrows. I say, yes, highlight. I say, I see you. You'll be visible, and you'll be worthy of all this praise. Thank you.
Got in the car, we drove over there. You know, I was dragging my feet getting out the house. Brought my little notebook.
My sister's like, by the way, I signed you up. You're going on in like 3 slots. And I was like, I can't do this.
I was afraid I was going to share like my most personal thoughts with a room full of strangers, and they were going to laugh at me or boo me or not receive me.
That's where the sign came from, because there was no way I was signing my real name on the open mic list.
I remember getting up there and I used my real name, Mike Bertram. And everybody was like, who's Mike Bertram? Because I didn't know poets had these super cool poetry names.
I remember every week I would sign my name on the list because at that spot, you might sign your name, you might not get called for a month because it was just that, like, popping.
You had one poet go up and just kill it, and then another poet and another poet. And it was like, no one that was like super young was getting on that mic.
They only let 20 people read, right? They get to the 20th person, which is not me. They say, thank y'all so much for coming on out. Y'all get home safe. So I go up, hey, brother. I was number 15. I didn't get to go. He said, thank you so much for coming. Come back next week. We'll see if we can get you on. Okay. I come back the next week. I think I signed like number 4. They got to number 20, who was not me. And they said, thank y'all so much for coming out. Get home safe. I'm back up again. Hey, brother. Hey, do you recall from last, because I didn't read this week either. And he was like, yeah, no doubt. Come back next week. We'll see what we can do. So I think I signed number fucking 1. Like I signed the first slot.
He was like, okay, this was going to happen. He was like, after this person goes, he was like, I'm going to go up. I'm going to do like closing announcements or whatever. He was like, and then you just come up to the mic and just do your thing. As soon as he finished, you know, people started standing up from their chairs, getting ready to walk out the door. But I'm like, you know, it's cool. Because I'm going to go up here and I'm going to do this poem. And I'm going to like, all the attention is going to turn back around, right? And before I got the second word out of my mouth, like the security guards were like standing in my face. Like, show's over, homie. Like, but the host, show's over.
I went out to the car and I got my notebook, and I had never shared my poetry publicly before.
It wasn't a journal. It was like a notebook I called like Mother Goose book. It was this huge, it was such an asshole of a notebook. Like, it was too big.
I also have a poem. Can I read my poem? Like, I remember asking permission.
I did my poem. I read my poem from my book. I had on this big bucket hat that covered my eyes. You couldn't even see my face.
I used to wear a hat all the way down into my face, like covering my eyes, because I just couldn't stand to look at the audience. And then in my head, because I couldn't see them, they couldn't see me.
And I was holding this paper, and you could see like it was just rumbling.
Very nervous, extremely nervous. Hell yeah, I was nervous.
I'm visibly trembling.
I'm speeding through this thing.
Kept my eyes closed the entire time. It wasn't no deep poetry shit I didn't want to forget or fuck up.
My first poem was an angsty love poem.
Like, damn, he scares me. Kind of love poem, you know?
The first poem I wrote was some super cliche shit, like, you know, a lot of poems about like love and revolution. It might have been called like I Love the Revolution. I don't know. You know what I mean? It might have been every cliche thing you could think of rolled into one very, very, you know, maybe not the best written poem.
It was something poetry cliche, like black men or black magic or black power. It was something like that.
And I just remember people like snapping and clapping. And I was like, ooh, they like it, they like it, they like it.
And I think there was like one line in there was like, and guys ain't shit, or something like that. And this girl was like, yes, girl. And I was like, what? Somebody clap for me? Oh my God.
It was trash.
So I got on stage and I did sort of like, that boy sits on a log. And it was, I don't know if it was as weird as I feel about it now. I just remember I gave it everything I had, y'all.
You know, when you have that fear of getting in front of people and speaking, you know, it's like all these different things happen in your mind in terms of what you think is going to end up happening. And none of those things happen.
And I was like, that wasn't so bad. actually, that shit felt like really good. Like, that's the best high I've ever had in my life.
And my heart was beating out my chest like, I cannot believe I did that. I did that.
And then I went back to my seat when I got off stage, and my best friend's back was on the seat of the chair, and he looked up at me and said, "You found it." And I knew exactly what he meant.
To be held in that way without a mask, without another story, without a distraction, without a fairy tale I was spinning was, yeah, I still shake when I think about it. Like, it's to be seen for the first time.
That was the moment that I kind of knew that things were going to change, or things had changed with the way that I write and the way that I approach the writing and the things that I could do.
It was like a cork had been popped.
There was just this cracking of the egg that released this yolk.
I started following that release, and I was like, I need to find out what that is, because the rhymes are horrible, but whatever that feeling is, I need to find that.
I just remember walking away from that venue that night thinking, I want to do this every day of my life.
So the first part of the writing process for me can usually be done anywhere. I'll go to my favorite coffee shop, I'll be out in public, and I kind of like it like that, you know? I like being out in the world and gathering ideas from the scenery around me. And that's okay in this stage, because all I'm really doing and all I'm aiming for is getting ideas out onto a page. I'm not necessarily looking to be tight with it yet, and I'm not looking to nail the poem down exactly yet. I can hone in later in solitude. I'll be able to just go in and edit and fine tune, but right now it's really just throwing out ideas. So in regards to this poem, I know that what I want to do is, because it's 10 minutes, I want this poem to have 3 acts. And I also know I don't want to memorize 10 minutes worth of poetry, because it just will be stale and it'll get boring. So I want to make this poem dynamic, where there are certain areas that are memorized, but in between those, I can just be like riffing and adding jokes and switching out those jokes whenever I need to, and just talking to the audience, and then go right back into the poetry part.
It is a hip hop gong show. It's basically what I walked into, right? And everyone before me is in like white tees. They like, yo, run track 4, you know, you know, doing this. And then I come up, right? I'm maybe 4 lines into it. And Bruce gongs me, pong, right? But then, because comedians are comedians, he's like, who told you to come here with this poetry shit? Don't I want to hear that goddamn shit? Who even told you this poetry shit was going anywhere? You doing poetry? I hope you ain't doing it for a living, because this shit ain't gonna work out. To be honest with you, if I was you, I'd go home and I'd kill myself. I would kill myself for walking into a room and try to do some goddamn poetry. I mean, he might go 15 minutes. He might have did 15 fucking minutes on how poetry sucks and I suck. That was a tough day.
So have you ever had a bad show?
Yeah. Have I ever had a bad show? I don't know what liar's gonna say no to that.
I've never had a bad show, Asia. No, I've had a lot of bad shows.
This kid that was sitting right in front of me just looked directly at me and plugged his ears and just basically laughed through the whole poem with his ears plugged.
I had Benadryl in my system, and I got on stage, and I literally, my brain went into pause in the middle of the poem. I couldn't remember a single word that came after it, man. It was not like I could recover either. I just went into the...
And then another time, you know, I was reading on stage and this dude starts charging the center aisle screaming faggot.
Like, that was because of the Benadryl. You know, don't do drugs and do poems.
When a show starts with you asking security to remove a guy at a poetry show.
You feel when people are absorbing you in a room, and then you feel when your shit's just bouncing off the walls.
It's just zero response. You get nothing back.
And the room just looks at me. Like, they don't clap, they don't boo, they just kind of...
And then another poet goes up behind you and they go crazy for him. And you're just like, how whack was I that no one wanted to even clap for me?
I'm a tender nugget, and I am an easily distracted fella. I'm auditory and visual distractions, or when people are chatting, or like it took me years to get over all of the commotion that goes on in a crowd and to stop taking it personally and to just do what I do and give my good energy to the people who I know are into it. This guy coming by while I'm trying to talk about it.
And then here I come with this, kind of introspective, spiritual questioning. Are you doing what you're supposed to be doing in life? And it's like, man, everybody trying to hear that. Yo, you didn't like that shit? I'm about to do another one you probably won't like too.
I'm not gonna lie, black crowds make me nervous. Like y'all, cause y'all will be like,
So then it makes you work that much harder. So, you're on stage like tap dancing and doing backflips and setting yourself on fire because people have now decided to show the fuck up in their own hometown.
I could set myself on fire up that month. They just didn't give a shit. It's just a tough room.
I love seeing things move from dark to light. And I can't do that if I'm not present and I'm distracted the whole time.
you're creating this work from your mind, your heart, your body, and soul, and you're presenting it to the world, and then all of a sudden, no one cares about it.
The disrespect, right? It is the agreement to everyone that this art form doesn't matter and we can walk around it like it's ambient noise. That's when it's the worst. Like, you don't even see me. So like I said earlier, I finally felt perfect, like I belonged to have a show where you feel exactly how you feel every day in the world. Like nothing you say matters, nothing you do matters. It don't matter if you're talented or not. You are not wanted. Your voice isn't wanted, your ideas aren't wanted. What do you do with that except recoil into yourself and start, remembering all the times in which this is a thing that you're used to? And those shows that constantly fortify that idea, that feed that doubt, that self-doubt, those are the ones that I'm like, this, you don't love art enough, so you got to go.
I think what makes a bad show is anything that shows that I wasn't prepared.
It's just like inviting folks over. I haven't cleaned. I don't have any food. And that's what it feels like.
Those are the moments where I say, okay, bad show, poorly planned. I should have been a little more in tune to what. But I mean, that was early in my career. I was young, and I was more so just trying to do everything at all times. Whatever poem happening, whatever venue is happening, and I wasn't fully aware of how to read the audience yet.
I'm not in the moment. I'm not being honest. Because the honest thing to do would have been to not begin my set until I confronted the things that I was feeling.
90% of the time when I've dropped my poem, it's because of that very thing.
Standing on stage, not knowing your shit is a miserable fucking feeling.
I've faced down a dog that's like chases after me and I had to jump over a fence. I've had a gun pulled on me before. Nothing is scarier than like being in front of a room and you're about to drop your poem.
I've never just dropped a poem and been like purely in silence, like deer in headlights. That's brutal.
Very, very rare does the kid drop a poem.
I'll just have this surge of confidence like, oh, I got this. I got it. And I don't. I really don't.
There are times when I've been performing a poem and knew that I didn't know the words that were coming 10 words from now, and praying that when I got there, they would somehow magically appear.
Okay, so you're in the middle of this poem and you're rocking it. And you're rocking it so well you get cocky because you're like, yeah, I'm doing this poem. And because every poet knows inside your mind, you're having a whole different conversation while your mouth is just running. So my mouth is running and my mind is going, and then my mouth stops. And my mind is like, oh, what's the next line? Oh, what do we got to do next? Oh, what do you say?
Oh, this is going to go bad. This is getting bad. This is getting really bad. And I blank.
It's that part, and it's like, why the fuck can't I remember this part?
You could ask me to remember my name at a point like that, and I wouldn't tell you.
I just stopped and like stared at everyone and tried to like back up and pick up my poem from a few lines before, and I just like.
And so finally, I just had to admit I don't know the poem.
I forgot the poem, admitted it, and then throughout like just a couple quick jokes there, kept the audience going instead of this dry moment where they're giving me this dry half support. Come on, you got it. Come on, poet. because that does nothing but make you forget it more.
This was an instance where the audience did know the poem. They knew the poem well enough, but apparently nobody else knew the next line to feed it to me.
He actually ran a chap up to the stage and was able to read the rest of my poem.
I would love to lose a poem 2 lines in, because then that's just a repeat. That's just such and such and such and such, such and such and such and such. And then you just repeat it, you know what I mean? And keep going. It just sounds like you're doing some dramatic effect shit. But even then, I wouldn't say, let me start over. I just take it back like, you know, such and such and such and such and such. Y'all don't hear me? Such and such, you know what I mean?
You know, that's when I've learned the power of 3. You just say a line 3 times, say a line 3 times, say a line 3 times, and then you get the fuck off the stage.
I think there's a lot of poets that when they mess up, they go, but if you didn't do that, they wouldn't know you messed up. If you're just like,
and you just and see the audience right now, they're like, oh my God, he's feeling it so much. And they don't know that in your mind, you're going, please find the fucking words, please find the words, please find the words. And then if you can't find the words, you bow out gracefully and go, you guys, I don't think I can do that one tonight. I just don't, I can't. And then they're like, the audience, you know, they're supportive. So they're just like, it's all right, man. It's all right. It's all right. And then you just do something else and pray you don't forget that. Because if you forget that second one, well, now we know.
But you know what's awesome in poetry? This fucking poetry is great. If you fuck a poem up, they clap for you and they snap. Oh, that's okay. Go in, poet. That's what I love about poetry.
You know the parts that you skipped were the dopest part of the poem, but you didn't say that. You just said the same thing 3 times that didn't make any sense. And now the kids are like, all right, that.
You know, you get the polite clap.
This is the only place you can fuck up and people applaud you. Poetry.
And you get off stage and then the host is like, yep.
When he got on stage, he said, hey, listen, we have never kicked anyone off this stage, but you have come as close as anyone has ever come.
If you're a doctor and you fuck up, they're not going to be like, oh, that's okay. You'll get the next heart attack next time. You fucked that surgery up. We got you on the next one.
I didn't do that poem for another 6 months. I was mad at the poem. Like, fuck that poem for doing that to me. Like, it's the poem's fault.
You know, maybe I get off stage and have a brief period where I'm like, everything that I've ever written is shit.
The world is not ending. The sky is not falling. It's one poem that, for whatever reason, just didn't connect to the space, or it didn't connect to me in the space.
I can hardly think of something that I think is bad, because at the same time it was my dream, you know? So many of the bad shows happened in the beginning, and all I could think the whole time was, I'm doing this, you know? This is my dream, and I'm doing it, and I can't believe, you know, I can't believe they just gave me $50 to read a poem.
Even in the bad shows, you learn so much about the art and about yourself.
The only thing you can really do is just look at yourself and you're like, I don't want to do this again. So the next time you have opportunity, you won't, because you've fully committed to not feeling like that anymore.
I've learned now to be my own audience first and foremost. So even if it's not sticking with everybody else, like, as long as it's landing with me, and I just will tune out everybody who's in that room. And at that time, like, I'm doing this for Chicondria, and not even just like for Chicondria, like who's present here, but I'm doing it for the little girl in Chicondria who didn't feel heard.
Am I doing this because I want to be popular? Am I doing this because I'm trying to get to a certain plateau in poetry? Or going back to the original reason why I started it, am I doing this because I want to be healed and whole?
But don't get me wrong, like, it's a really shitty experience right before and through the midst of, and it's tough because it makes you question why you're doing what you're doing, and is it worth it?
You can tell when a poet knows, I'm gonna rock this room.
Yeah.
Like, I'm gonna make this room everything right now. And you can tell the poets that kind of just go there to spit a poem, and they're just there to perform and leave.
Or they don't have the mastery yet
Of it.
crafting a set. You know,
It's either a new poem, or they're not. You can see the weariness in their eyes, or they're not fully confident in themselves.
Right.
Or if they stutter, you can see it. I think once you conquer the art of it, is I usually tell the poets I work with, the students, is no one knows you messed up unless you let them know.
Right.
Because no one knows your poem other than you.
Yeah.
So I think the newer poets, you can see in their eyes, they kind of get freaked out a little bit if they skip a line or they stutter.
Right.
When the people that have been doing it a while, they just use it. They use it with the poem and they keep it going.
Oh man, a good show. There's nothing like a good show.
My best shows are the ones where I can't get to the next line because the audience is still reacting to the line before that.
It's almost like I said hello. They were like, yeah. I was like, oh shit, this is gonna be a fucking night.
It's like a conductor. Like you're fucking, you can move with everything, like every motion.
And I love looking out into the audience and seeing people mouth along to my poems. That's like so affirming.
They know the words. They know what I'm gonna say, but they just want to hear me say it.
You got them in the palm of your hands, man. And when you fucking when you hit the last line, it nails it every time. It's a roar.
Oh, I'm Beyonce at that point. At that point, you might as well have the fans on.
I just felt like a different type of entity because of all the energies that were working in that moment.
The collective energy that they bring to the space is pulling whatever it is I have to say, like, out of my body.
It's not to say that everybody is going to be on the same page, but there are times where everybody is on the same page.
If you make that connection, they can take you to a place that's nowhere, that you're not even on this stage.
Almost like an out-of-body experience, like where you kill it so hard, you don't even feel like you were even in the room. You feel like you were like up here watching yourself. Like, who is this person? Oh, it's me.
At that point, it is the connection.
I think the connection is what, I was going to say gets me off, but I don't know how that sounds.
And time just becomes a different thing.
Some lady in the crowd said, I thought you were supposed to be on for an hour. And then she looked at her watch. She says, oh shit, it's been an hour. And I was like, that's what's up. Like, if I can make an hour of your life disappear like that, I'm like, that's what's up. David Blaine in this motherfucking, like, it just took no fucking hour. What up?
For somebody to come up to me after a show and say, hey, I lost my dad, so I relate to that poem. That poem saved me in a place where I didn't think that I was worth saving.
Like, I walk away with that feeling. I sleep with that feeling.
I think a poet or a performer knows when they get off stage if they've affected the room and they've pumped in the kind of light energy, the kind of thing that makes people remember why they went out to see a show, to become lighter, not to just be distracted, but to have some sort of transcendental lightness happen to their way of being that they can carry with them, even if it's just for a moment.
It opens people up.
It's life-giving.
It's some magic, man. Like, it's magic.
There's something that you feel that like you always want to feel, and you want to stay in that space and never leave it.
Poison notes and childhood bravery. When the telephone was a tin can on a string. I fell asleep with you, still talking to me. You said you weren't afraid to die. And I don't think that I've ever loved you more than when you turned away, when you slammed the door, took the car and drove toward Mexico. And you wrote bad checks just to fill your arm. I was young enough, I still believed in war.
I crop out the trailer and the splintered remains of the front door. I crop out your name all over the news. I crop out the sawed-off shotgun they found hidden in the yard. I crop out the blood-vacant faces of every soul who was sold to. I crop out their families' hunted hearts. I rotate the image till you are upside down, hanging from the monkey bars, hollering my name. Andrea, look what I can do. I zoom in till there is no lighter beneath the spoon, just ice cream dripping from your face, and me trying to teach you how to blow out the candles the day you turned 2 years old, your cheeks like pink balloons, giggling away gravity. I give more detail to the background. I pose you beside our bloodline, our grandfather throwing his liver through the kitchen window, our grandmother on her knees sweeping up the glass. I zoom in to the pieces she didn't find. I find them in the sole of your shoes on your worst day of junior high. There is a thin line between skewing the truth and giving a panoramic view. I don't know if I am widening the lens or if I am just making an excuse when I say you were a kid the first time you used. When I say you wanted blue hair and a boyfriend, not a conscience that wouldn't have a good vein left, not an abscess in the arm you would one day not hold your family with, not me, falling off the wagon of my unforgiveness, running to the police station, begging them to replace your photo with the negative, the dark side with full light, the filth-hungry scream in your body every time you tried to get clean, the clinic that told our mother you would die if she didn't send you back to the streets to find the poison, to kill the bugs, how I count your legs when you walked into a room, how I still do, but how that isn't the right exposure, because you are also the kindest person I ever knew, and that in itself has been its own dark room, considering the ugliness is to scale, considering our family tree and how there isn't a person who loves you, who isn't dead on the branch, how loving you less might have been the sweetest gift I could have given my own life, but how that sweetness would have rotted God's teeth when every Christmas morning you woke me at 4 a.m. more excited for me to open my stocking than you were to open yours. How do I say that to a judge and not sound insane? How do I say the truth isn't the right filter? The truth knows nothing of who you almost were. But I do. I do. I just click a button. I undo one tiny thing. And there you are. There you
You're the yellow bird I've been waiting for. The end of paralysis. I was a statuette. Now I'm drunk as hell on the piano bench. And when I press the keys, it all gets reversed. The sound of loneliness makes me happier.
What am I gonna tell these white people? I have no idea, being this, black girl from the Ninth Ward in New Orleans, I have no idea what I'm about to say to this group, right? After praying about this, Spirit was like, they called you to come. So you have to continue to tell your story. That was the first time that I heard that my message had to be of the universality of love and what that means. And just because we're speaking about the universality of love, that does not mean that that is devoid of your individual history and story.
I felt like I had a secret that I wanted to share with people who are listening, and hopefully anybody that was listening also was going through whatever I was writing my poem about, and maybe we could talk about it and maybe it would help me through. So it was like I was secretly conjuring therapy.
Everybody said it would get less scary, but it hasn't gotten less terrifying to me.
I thought that the longer I did this, like that would go away.
Performing a poem in front of somebody is as close that you can be to being butt naked in public without being arrested.
I don't think there's any performer of any kind that is not ever nervous.
You don't lose those nerves. They just become different things that you can use.
Let my breath determine my movement, not my movement determine my breath.
You can't really dictate the energy. All you can do is help guide it.
That's what I'm concerned with, is like, where am I taking this audience?
Whether it was a figurative or a literal bad trip, I just wanted to land them in a safe place.
I'm just trying to make sure that they're in the same room I am.
Every response is appropriate. You know what I mean? If the crowd is laughing, you're doing a good job. If the crowd is crying, you're doing a good job. If the crowd is sitting quietly thinking, you're doing a good job.
I don't know if the audience ever knows how much of a part of that conversation they really are. I mean, I feel like, you know, the audience is pulling the poem out of me.
So I think, again, that goes back to how do we build this confidence and intuition, you know, to be able to give a space what it needs and to be able to receive from the space like, okay, this is what is needed here. So it might be times you just got to rearrange the entire room.
Once upon a time, I was a really loud poet. I was really, really angry. I was really just angry at a lot of stuff that I just was trying to figure out. And after I screamed all I can scream, and I did as much as I did, I started to realize, like, I want people to listen to me, but I don't want to scream at them, but I still want them to hear me.
I had never known that many people cared what I had to say.
Who am I? Who am I that these people are sitting here paying attention to what I have to say? They actually give a fuck. Like, that in and of itself is mind-boggling to most poets.
And you can feel angry a lot, but you can also vent that frustration without filling them with frustration.
This art form is like sorcery, because for that moment, folks are under your spell. And so you can say whatever, but it's a spell. So you also are responsible for the impact.
I'm going to do poems about me. But in the course of these poems about me, I'm going to tell you the story of you.
That's when I feel I have served to the fullest of my capacity.
I found it. I found that thing about me that I can contribute as penance for my human experience.
Where I feel so sure that this is what I'm supposed to do, that this is the only path for me, is when I get messages from strangers and they write the most brave things or the most affirming things, and I have to stop and think, like, what have I done to deserve these such kind words or such unwavering support for this art form that has meant so much to me.
Sometimes we're putting on airs to get attention, not realizing the moment before you put the airs on, the moment before you start performing is actually the poetry.
There's a thing that I know that I have brought right to the space that shifts the atmosphere of the space. So I know that that is a gift of mine, to be able to shift atmospheres, to be able to shift space so that we are able to shift perceptions of ourselves, of how we see God, of how we see one another, of how we see the world.
I remember you did a workshop, and I always tell people this story. In that workshop, you told us sometimes it takes you months to write a poem. And I remember sitting there in this workshop like, oh shit, I'm looking up to this dude, and it takes him months to write a poem. I write a poem in a week. I write 2 poems a week. I'm clearly better than him. He's struggling. And then I started being introduced to more poets. I started hearing work that didn't sound like mine. I started hearing a sound that I liked and a way that people were putting words together. And I was like, I want to push to put my words together a little bit more like that, or use less words. And the moment I started trying to do that, it started taking 2 weeks and 3 weeks and 4 weeks.
When you sit around a group of poets, one of the corniest, geeky things that we do is every couple of lines, somebody will say, "Oh, that's a poem." We're just having a regular conversation, and somebody will say, "Man, something about tomato juice to just make you happy." "Oh, that's a poem." "Oh, tomato juice. V8 splash."
I don't write because I like writing. I write because I have problems.
I hate writing. I hate it because I know I'm dope, right? I know this is my calling. I found that out at a young age, fortunately. And what's just difficult is just pulling it out, and it's just difficult.
I can always see pictures, very, very clear images in my head where it was scary.
Why haven't I gone there and written a poem that is truly vulnerable, something that is really about me? I'd have to say that The reason for that is just fear.
I've come across some poems I've written where my family members are offended, or I've hurt the feelings of someone I love and truly care about by doing nothing more than being honest in a poem.
The universe is trying to give to the rest of the world through you. And you can't stifle it and be like, oh, well, if my family hear this, wait a minute, universe.
And I ask myself, like, what are you really about to tell people? Because once you say it, you can't back away from it.
And if you're going to go in a microphone in front of 50 or 100 people, or you're going to upload a video on the internet, we don't need our life story on display for everybody else to hear.
Is that going to, emasculate my husband? If I say this sentence, is my daughter going to hear it in 5 years and question what type of mother I am?
I think the creative in me, the poet in me, is totally uncensored. And then I have to grapple with that as the person. Like, do I share this? Is it too personal to my family or my loved ones? But the poet tends to win.
Forget what anybody else thinks about what you write. That's rule number 1. The appendix to that rule is like, forget what even the people you love the most are going to think about what you write.
Yeah, well, we kind of like offending people. I mean, that's what, you know what I'm saying? That's the great part about what it is that we do, in a sense.
It feels good. It feels good to be able to sabotage yourself and say, don't worry, self. You don't have to write that. Nobody knew you thought it. Just you know you thought. Just keep it in your brain. Don't put it on the paper.
Not everybody's gonna feel you. I feel like if everybody's always feeling you, then there's something you're not scratching the surface of.
I either get to the conversation too late or too soon. like I'll say something and then it'll be maybe relevant later, but I will have been thinking about it for too long. You know what I mean? Or I'm too afraid to get lost in the conversation of everybody screaming, so I avoid the conversation.
Sometimes I want to comment on something and don't necessarily know if it's my place. And so my work helps me to figure out how to comment without judgment.
I have thousands of things, literally thousands of things I was just thinking about that are not shared anywhere. Not to say that I wouldn't. I'm not like, oh, it's just for me, but it's just sometimes you write stuff and that's enough. Sometimes writing it down is enough.
I got this writing prompt from a poet years ago that said, you have to start writing what you're terrified to write. And when I got that prompt, I couldn't write anything because I didn't want to write what I was afraid to write.
Because we know like our thresholds and we know our breaking points when it comes to things we want to face and we want to just, get out of ourselves.
If you're going through something, you can write about it. You can write about it all day long. But don't just crank out some emotional, passionate draft and go read it in front of everybody. It doesn't do anything for them.
I found when I began studying the Bible that when I would return to the text and read something that I had read before after having some additional experience, it would take on like a different meaning. When I first noticed that, I was like, I want to be able to do that in my writing.
My writing style, I like to say, is like making gumbo.
I don't know what kind of style you would call it. I mean, I call it bitter, married, and bald because, I just feel like that's my life.
I go to poets like chefs go to spices.
I would like to believe that my writing style is a body of antennas with clear reception, translating a crisp language.
I'll listen to a little bit of this and then I'll try and pepper it up with a little bit of that.
But I don't want that to influence my work too much because I feel like you can end up being a really good replica of somebody else, but never like a best you.
In each individual family, the gumbo is always going to be different and it's never going to be the same. Like you always have like a special thing that you add to your gumbo that makes it just completely different.
I feel style of writing is first of all like really solitary.
I'm not like let me light my incense and burn my, sage and all of this writer.
I know people who like get in the coffee shop and they like write together and like it's like quaint and they have like coffee and it's nice and they might like be on their laptop or whatever. Like me, I am like bracing myself against my kitchen counter like because there's a thing that's been just like thumping in my head for 2 weeks.
I start with, I know I want to communicate this thing.
Well, first you have to think of an idea. That's probably very important. and then you jot lines down.
Sometimes there's a couple of lines that I know I have to use them somewhere. Like, okay, I want to say this line. I don't know what poem it's gonna go in, but it's got to go somewhere.
But the initiating incident is not me. You know what I'm saying? You living life. You doing whatever. You in the shower. You sleep. You trying to. You know what I'm saying? You're doing some other thing, and then boom.
I'll get an itch, basically, an idea, and something that I can't put down. So I'll hang it up like a spider web in the back of my head, and then when I'm having conversations that week, phrases and things will catch in that spider web, and I'm like, oh.
And there's a really long incubation process for me. I can have an idea for a poem for months and never write a word down.
I hate how long I need to keep the spider webs up sometimes.
To me, a good idea brings with it such a responsibility. Like, I'm like, this idea is dope. The only thing that can fuck this idea up is me.
The biggest lesson in self-sabotage is I like to let getting things perfect get in the way of getting things done.
It's annoying because you're like, I want to have this at my next set. You know, I want to have this when I think that it's necessary. But really, I'm such a believer in like fate and timing. So just because I think it's necessary at that point doesn't mean that it's actually ready.
Am I ready for this poem? Am I at a point where I can do the poem what I would say justice?
I feel like I get lots of, great ideas, but I'll have an awareness that I'm not yet a good enough writer to write that poem well. And that will frustrate me.
The thing that frustrates me the most over and over and over, the frustration I have the most frequently, is that I can't always nail the idea.
It's almost like waiting on a muse to come knock at your door and be like, hey, here's the poem you've been waiting on, here it is. And then like sometimes them hoes don't show up when you need them to.
Yeah, the most challenging part is just looking at a blank page. And it's just like, oh, this is going to take work.
It's not always, let me say that, it's not always I know exactly what I'm going to do. It's not always that. There are times where it is, where it is that. But then there are other times where it's a slow simmering.
Things rarely click all at once.
My thoughts so commonly happen at once. So there's 12 of them, or 12,000 of them, or 12 million of them, and there's only one mouth through which they are to come out.
I just write until the words stop coming.
And he'll have a thing where he writes you, have you write a poem, right? And you have to go in and you have to cut 50% of those words and see if it still makes sense. And you have to go in and cut another 50% of those words and see if it still makes sense.
And I spend a lot of time trying to hide all my rhyming from the listener. I rhyme almost every other line, and I'm trying to hide that from everyone but me. But there's something in my, rhythmic body that sort of needs a pulse happening.
It's just like da 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 da.
I often know the sound of a poem before I know the words.
That will start turning into like a phrase, and I will sometimes not know what the significance of that sound or that phrase is until I get a little manic with it.
So if somebody were to walk in on me writing, it's really embarrassing actually, because I'm making all these sounds that aren't a language.
My brain actually functions with, okay, this thing is happening. What does it mean next to this other thing? Because they're happening in the same sphere.
That I go off on tangents where I'm not actually staying in the world of the poem, and I know that's a major rule to break, and I still keep doing it. I don't care, because I just get excited about how far I can just keep taking something, and then it just leaves the world of the poem completely, and then
comes back.
Yeah.
Language economy too. Like how much language you use in a poem, and how much work can you make individual words do?
The publisher said that I was using all the same words in every poem and rearranging them in different order.
If we're going to go in and actually utilize language in a crisp and innovative way, I want to unpack each of those lines.
Sometimes one line and it's just not flowing, and I'm reading it and I'm like, it feels like I'm done, but something just doesn't feel right. And then you might change a word or take out a line, and then you're just like, bam, that's it.
Sometimes I'll be in a room for a whole day, 12 hours, from like 8 to 8. And that entire day I'll be I'll be on one line.
I wake up at 3 a.m. with a line like, oh shit, this is okay. All right, that's the one. That's the line I need there.
If it's a beautiful line, I'll feel that, like I just invented an instrument.
You know, if you're married or dating, that's complicated for, you know, whoever you like, oh shit, you know, sometimes you want to share, hey, listen to this. This shit dope, right? That's good, huh?
If I show up for 30 days in a row and I only get one good line from showing up every day and all those days of not being brilliant, when you put those 30 lines together, through the power of association, it just takes some tweaking before you may have yourself a brilliant poem.
Whenever you write a line that feels like a yes, every time that happens, I really do have that experience of not feeling like I wrote it. And whenever I feel like it's something that I've written, I think it sucks.
It's always the pieces that I'm trying to be more pretentious in, or I feel like this is for the crowd and it's not for me. Whenever I'm doing it for other people is when I tend to notice that the ball gets dropped.
We know what people are looking for. We know what's gonna kind of get reactions. We know what should be considered good. And then we forget about the person behind the poem.
I don't like very much to force words to come onto paper.
I mean, this is what society does. They tell us push, 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 grind, 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 force, 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 you know, and at some point we have to ease, you know, let things be.
It's just a consistent truth. You're just not going to be brilliant every time you sit down to write or sit down to the piano or sit down to study or go for a run. Like whatever it is, you're just not going to be, you know, in the zone every time. But if one keeps showing up, you know, if I show up for 30 minutes that day to write and I'm not at my best, there's still going to be one gem in there.
It's just a matter of allowing yourself to get there and enjoying the ride. And whatever comes out may not be what you expected, but what you learned along the way is going to last you way longer than that moment.
One of the hardest things to do, I think, is to not push. And it's one of the greatest things to do, not push, to just allow the baby to come.
I am because of those who've come before me. They who can no longer step and fetch it for pennies, or blackface for wooden nickel promises of walking in the front door, when against every odd, they develop a double consciousness. You see, the cognitive dissonance of being African in America. It is a speck of sand in the craw coated over to the point that it pearls to the size of a dream. A dream of owning one's own soul, a dream too real not to become true, for we have gone gentle into that good night too many times and have been awoken by the hands that have cracked the whips. I breathe in the dust of those so mighty and swift, they give me strength when there is none. When I was young, they spoon-fed me archetypes too bitter to trust. I have fasted for truth in the gardens of Babylon and found substance in the solace of my own history. I have learned that my stock survived those ships to write the stories of the ghettos of desire, who have been waiting for Godot, who have contemplated suicide while singing in those cotton fields. They know how this world still prefers us in our most niggardly state. This world does not understand we have never stopped being the sands of Egypt. The blood all over Baltimore, the shrapnel of Greyhound buses burning for freedom, the speeches of Stokely and Martin and Malcolm and Garvey, mixing in the smoking cauldron of Harriet's fired shotgun. For too many have fell victim of thinking what is good for the oppressor must be good for us, and we cannot have that. We cannot have us speaking these old colonial lies with our brown mouths, our brown, regal, tribe-maker mouths, our always trendsetter, melanated, commodified skin, our holiest of holy project survival kit of bones and brains and heart and tongue. There is nothing we have ever needed but the remembrance of us, of they who taught how to gumbo pop a stomach, knocking at the door of oppression with a pen in one hand and a machete in the other, all while bearing a back of busted open salty wounds, breathing in the southern air. Let not their deaths be in vain. When this world begs you to forget your past, it will own your future. We're looking directly into the wilt of the slash that your heart from rhythms of never again, never again. Do not forget the sun in your skin, those cuts in your toes, those keys in your heart passed down from generations. Know that before the temple of knowledge will always swing the gates of toil, and we have been building monuments of perseverance in the shapes of cotton bundles ever since those southern code switches have been flipping interstellar coordinates into songs of drinking gourds. We are because of those who have come before us. They were bent over, picking master teachers out the pockets of the galaxy, humming healing songs for the wave of the future for you. You be that wave of the future. Can you not hear them? Are you still sleeping? You kings of Nefertiti and you queens of Lobachor. Are you still sleeping?
So a lot of times I like a concept and I work my way through it, and then I don't really know if I've got a winner, and then I read it to somebody and they go, "Oh wow, that's cool," and I go, "Is it?"
We're writers, we're poets. You can just sit down and write a poem and people are gonna be like, "Oh, that's good." But there's nothing, it's just like an empty box that you can just crush it and there's nothing there.
Like the poem I wrote about my grandmother. I had been trying to write that poem for like 15 years. And every time I wrote it, I captured the story, but I didn't capture the spirit of my grandmother, right? And when I captured the spirit of my grandmother in the words, right, I read it aloud, and by the time I finished reciting the poem, tears were streaming from my eyes.
Then I go totally away from that personal place and I go to the role of like a surgeon, I just try to find what's contaminating my poem and just keep slicing away.
And it's just like about like chipping away, chipping away.
There's power in, something being concise. I don't have to give everything here. That's the other part, that we don't have to give everything right here.
There's this old adage where like a poem is never done, it's merely abandoned.
1, poems are never done. 2, if you like it.
The easy answer is it just feels right. The more true answer is that a poem is never done. It's always growing.
A poem is a living, breathing thing in my mind, and it can change.
I mean, and how can it not change? You gonna change. You know what I mean?
How do I feel about this piece of work? And not just this piece of work, but how do I feel about myself in this piece of work?
I guess the answer to that is it matters to me. And I'll agonize over it until I feel good, because the entire poem sounds different once I truly believe what I've written.
When I read it back to myself in its entirety, and I get to that last word, and it's right, like I sometimes will walk around the room like, oh shit, like I'm so fucking excited. Like you would think that I didn't write it.
I don't really ever like feel good when it's done because of everything that it's taken to get the poem out.
And sometimes endings are ugly, and I have to be okay with that. In New Orleans, when we bury people, it's a party.
Yeah.
It's a dance. And with that in your bones, with that being the cultural genetic that's passed down, that lives in you, how you tend to describe things tend to be in the same kind of sentiment. It's like a jazz funeral. You certainly address the fact that, man, this is a
right,
death,
a solemn, right.
But at the same time, there's a time where you still have to rejoice because there's a transitioning here, there's an ascension here. You know what I mean? So that's the point for me, I think, too, with just poetry. That we touch on all of these ugly things because we have to, right? All of these stories of injustice and where there's all of this lack and everything else. But we can't just leave it there. Like, that would be irresponsible.
Right.
Right? To just leave it there. So we have to give some kind of tangible solution, even if it's not a solution, but some kind of hope.
Right.
That people are not just hearing this and it's like, oh shit, let me slip my throat.
Yeah.
There's no hope after this. What we gonna do?
When I think about how much time it often takes me to write a poem and how many hours would go into a piece that I think is strong, it doesn't feel like talent as much as I feel like Rudy, you know, the movie Rudy.
That's why when someone tries to steal your work, it's so infuriating, aggravating, and will push you to some extremes because of the hours and the nights and the weeks and the years you spend agonizing over these words and putting these words like in the proper place and saying, no, not this word. This is the word. Okay, no, let me scratch that whole sentence and come. I mean, you do that so much for someone to then say, I'm gonna take that shit.
That's what it means to just look around the world and figure out where the poem is, how it will help people, and how you can capture it truthful and virtuous enough that people believe in it, and it's not a compromise, and you're not fronting, and you're not up there performing, because it could become art for vanity's sake.
When they are attuned and they are listening and they open themselves to the experience, we can make them feel everything. And that is a fucking superpower.
The hardest thing I think is to respect all of the voices that come through the poetry that I get.
It's me, right? Of course, when we're doing this work, it's us. But then there are times where we're tapping into something that is so deep in us that we're speaking in those voices.
I don't feel like I can really take credit for none of the poems that are created through me. I shape the work that came.
I don't want my work to be just a reactionary piece of art. I want it to be a piece of art that is a proactive, living, spirit-filled work.
You know what? I hope this does the justice that I think it should do.
I like keep so much carried in my body and in my thoughts, and like being able to put it out in the polished version of a poem that other people can connect with feels like I have let go of a weight.
The amount of things that I've been through is unreasonable for any human being. But there's nothing that I could have done outside of try to make what I've been through palatable for someone else that's still going through it. It's a process to turn your poison into medicine.
I'm supposed to be on vacation with my wife. We got a hotel, and on the way down to the hotel, she could tell that I was a bit distracted and that I wasn't present. And she knows me well enough now that when she sees me that way, most times it's because I have something creative that's thumping in my head and I'm trying to sort it out. She also knows that I've been working on this poem, so she knows I was probably consumed by that. She doesn't consider herself a creative person, but she knows that in those moments she needs to give me my space so I can sort through these thoughts, or else I will never be present the rest of the time. So she turned to me and said, go take care of that. Take care of it tonight, get it out of your system. Otherwise you're just gonna be, distant the rest of the time, and I don't want that. So I left her upstairs, she's sleeping, and I decided to come to the lobby and try to get some writing done. It's not really the ideal place, but when you start to have these kind of thoughts, then you have to find a way to get it down as quickly as possible or you lose them. And right now, I'm not really trying to put concrete ideas on this poem. I'm not trying to dress it up and make it pretty. All I'm trying to do right now is just get from point A to point B, get the story laid out. Once I have that structure in place, then I feel like I can come back later, make edits. If I can do that, I'll feel accomplished. And it'll leave my brain, and then I can enjoy the rest of this vacation, and my wife won't be so pissed off at me. So here's the situation. I was in my Airbnb, and I was leaving to go to the airport, and my car wouldn't even make it off the driveway, and I went sliding down the hill, hit a curb, and now fluids are leaking out. Car won't even move. I called the rental car company, and they said they'll send a tow truck, and then the tow truck calls and said that they can't even get to me because roads are closed and ramps are closed. So now I just got to stay in the car and try to keep warm and do the best that I can and hope I can get to the airport in time to make my flight. This is what it's like to be on the road. So you're miles and miles and miles away from home, and you know you're just hoping that nothing goes wrong. That's what's going on right now. See, one of the amazing things about poetry in the poetry community is that as soon as they found out I got stuck, I started getting phone calls, and then all of a sudden, John Good, who I interviewed yesterday, decides to show up and come and get me. and we are driving slow as fuck right now to try to get back to the airport.
It's not gonna be no take two. Ain't gonna be no accident part two.
Nope.
Nah.
There's a snowstorm and I'm in a rental car and I'm trying to find an obscure college somewhere. Like that part is challenging. But I get a lot of joy out of also conquering problems alone, feeling like I don't have to depend on anybody in order to problem solve or to make it happen. And then afterwards I'm like, yeah, like that was so kick-ass. Like I just drove by myself up a mountain in a snowstorm in the middle of Pennsylvania.
It can be, scary to say the least, especially when you don't know where you are, when your cell phone doesn't have a signal, when the main airport was 2 hours in the opposite direction, when you're about to run out of gas and you don't see a place that looks like Black people live there.
I love the alone time in between shows, and I love going into a hotel room at the end of the day and like being by myself, and I think that's fantastic. I think like the energy suck comes when you show up and suddenly you have to be on, and you have to be the person that this school has booked.
Going to a college show and they're like, so we forgot to make flyers and tell people about the show, so it's just us. And it's like 2 people. And I'm like, really? Like, you're going to have me do a poem for 2 fucking people? I mean, kind of, if you... I'm like, ugh.
And there was like 6 people there.
There were 3 people in that room, and all of them were the people who booked me.
That's like talking to yourself for an hour, like, I mean, that's, they give you this check, but you go cry in the car maybe.
I am not salted about it because each of those 6 people were so engaged and so wonderful. And even I shouldn't say engaged. They were pretty not engaged throughout the show.
The worst show I ever had was in like a side room of a cafeteria during lunch.
Any show that happens in a lunchroom is a bad show. Let me just start there.
People trying to eat their lunch and you got to do an hour set.
I'm not performing in any cafeterias on no day. I don't give a fuck if it's closed. I don't care if it used to be a cafeteria. Now all you got is little, a two-pan skillet. I don't want it.
It's always the college show that's in the middle of the cafeteria. Like during the height of lunch. You're in there, some kid's getting his Subway sandwich or Chick-fil-A, and they run in the espresso machine the whole fucking time. And you're just like, man, why are you ordering coffee? And then it's the person who's overzealous at their job screaming out the order, Randy! You're like, yo, you're in the middle of this poem about your grandmother, and here comes the cafeteria worker screaming out some dude's name, and you're just like, oh, why am I here right now?
And in like that moment where it's like the arc, you have to have a certain breath and you let it be like a little silent. And the woman from the back of the kitchen yells out, cheeseburger, cheeseburger.
A school put me in the cafeteria at lunch and put me in front of the automatic doors that led to the patio, like the fucking grocery store, right? So every time I moved, which I do for a straight hour, every time I moved, and then like 5 seconds later, they start to come back together, and then I move again.
All right, how shitty can it get, before I'm like defeated by the circumstances? And how much do I have to look at myself and like think about my lifetime, years of writing and performing, and is this worth it?
It's the moment where you discover how much you really want to do what you're doing, how well you want to perform this poem, how much you want to be on the road, because those moments right there let you know that you are simply here to do a service, and you do your job and you get off the stage, and that's it.
And just putting yourself out there so much, of repeatedly giving little parts of yourself out to 100 apathetic audiences a year, or 100 audiences that love you and who are in the palm of your hand and who really look to you for guidance and life advice and survival, it can be really tiring.
Showing up to a show that one night in that city, that's the one night Buddy's coming. Fucking pizza and beer. But for me, every night, the pizza and beer.
I think when you do your job right, especially as a performer, it's gonna literally drain you of your energy.
I always say what fills you also empties you.
The interesting thing is, whenever you ask me about the worst part of my job, it's still going to be better than the worst part of a job that I don't want to do.
It almost humbles me, like it brings me back down to earth. It reminds me that, like, you ain't shit, Sierra. All right, if I'm performing in a cafeteria at noon on a Friday and nobody's listening, there is one person that's going to message me 6 hours later and say they went home and wrote their first poem.
Many people like travel the world through many different routes and reasons. And my reason is that I believed enough in my voice and my life force that it took me to certain places.
Essentially, a piece of paper and some words are my passport around the world. That's fucking insane.
I woke up and all of a sudden I was 31 and there was like bits and pieces of me across the country.
I mean, every now and again I'll be like, oh, I ain't writing these poems, I ain't making. But dude, I write poems for a living, man.
We just crashed, like the loudest sound ever on the highway on this trip. And then we just are sort of smoking and we pull up, the car is smoking. We pull over and there's this huge chunk of metal stuck into the bottom of the car in the tire. And I am freaking out. Like I am just, starting to cry. And what are we going to do? And Lara, who is, the feminist girl on the tour.
Right.
Where's the jack? And I'm like, the jack, the mechanic said the jack couldn't be found. It's not in this car. Like, it can't be found. She's like, there is a jack. She searches the car. She finds the jack. We're on the side of the highway. She lifts up the car. She pulls this huge chunk of metal out of the tire. She figures out, and she just rescues us.
And rescues you guys.
Yeah.
At that time, I don't think there were many people who thought being a poet was a viable art form and a career choice. Like, oh yeah, I'm gonna be a poet. And it's like,
Poetry is the vessel. Once I realized I loved it, I had to figure out where could it fit.
So it's a matter of stepping outside of the bounds of what people try to put poetry in. They want to put you in some club with some Love Jones sound and a jazz band behind you, and that'll be what poetry is. And you gotta be like, nah.
It pushes the art form forward without just saying the same thing and doing it the same way it's been consumed.
How can I make each and every last one of these different things that I like to do in life come into one?
Poets are just really remarkable in the ways that we've been able to approach our approach to markets.
So at some point, I'm going to have to figure out how to combine poetry, photography, and barbecuing, because these are three things that I like.
My intent is, where can I build capacity and space for art?
Maybe I can put the words on the ribs. I'm going to figure it out.
It kills me when poets won't take a gig because they don't want to have to write about the things that the people ask about.
We are the ones that can't be co-opted because we write for us.
2018, I said, was my year of nah.
I could have very well said, nah. I could have got on one of these poet stances and be like, I'm not doing that. I'm not selling my art for money. I'm not going that route. I'm going to stay here and starve and be creative.
There are certain things you have to do if you want to make money, if you want to be successful at anything, right? And this is no different.
You can't say, you're amazing, you're awesome, I'd love to have you, yes, let's do it, on one hand, and be like, I have $50 on another.
There's so many people I can't depend on. They say they're going to come through, but if the money is not immediate, if there isn't an instant gratification, then they off it. And that does not make a community. That's not community. That's thirst.
If you can open your actual wallet and take out a fucking 20 or 2 20s and a 10 and hand that to me, that's not what I'm worth.
You can't afford to worry about which shows are the good shows and the bad shows when you ain't got no shows.
When you're nickel and diamond poets and you're like, I'm gonna buy you a drink. Fuck your drink. I don't want your fucking drink.
I don't understand how a poet can survive if they are a touring poet and they're going from place to place to place to place, performing at a slam and trying to win $100, $200.
I see someone who's trying to get some shit. Why would I not try and help somebody do something? Especially at the very least, if it's not even a field I'm trying to go into. You know, if there's a performance job and they're like, hey, we got to do that. It's like, I don't want to do that. Why would I not pass that along? And there are people who would keep that, do a horrible job.
And so I feel like the biggest challenge right now is, getting poets sometimes to understand their worth, to not do shows unless they have a contract, to not, support venues that have been known to take money away from the genre.
I think there's more we can do and more opportunities that we can open up, but you got to get people who are willing to do that. It's just a matter of not worrying you won't be irrelevant if someone else gets the shine for a moment.
As the years spin by and we keep gaining accolades, we keep gaining awards. If the awards are like a neighborhood award or the Grammys or Emmys or Tonys or whatever, the dollar amount still doesn't equate to the amount of work and sweat equity that we've put into becoming professionals and masters in our trade.
It's kind of exhausting to always have to sell yourself and to sell your art and to sell your story.
But I mean, I had to come to the point where as much as I want that money, I want my me.
For a lot of my 20s, I don't think I focused on me and taking care of myself and enriching me as a person. I looked at enriching me as the poet, as the product.
There was even a period of time where me and my mom and there were struggles over what direction I was going. Her belief moved from worry to understanding I was going to be able to survive to seeing leadership in me, and that all came because of art.
I have a quote on my refrigerator that comes from a song. It's like, it may not be a diamond, but it's all gold to me. Like, my success or my whatever might not look like whatever to you, but like, if you knew what it took to get here, like even to this little apartment or whatever, like it took a lot to find my own space, because there was a time when I didn't have that space.
We as poets, we have to be very careful, just like any other genre, of like comparing ourselves to other artists. Like even like yourself, where I see you and I see you as my peer. And remember when we first slammed together at Southern Fried in 2004, and the things that you've done since then. And I look at my career and the things that I've done since then, and it's very easy for me to feel like, man, I haven't accomplished as much as Asia. But when I look at what I'm here for, and when I look at my purpose, and it really, I do feel like I've made a significant and a meaningful impact in what I'm supposed to be doing.
Once you kind of make a statement about what a poem is or what a poem should do, it makes a statement about what poetry isn't.
Whoever the authority is on like what is considered quote unquote national level poetry, is telling people what good poetry is. When at the time that I was introduced to the national poetry scene, the poets were telling people what good poetry was.
Like, trauma pimping is a ill fucking thing, and I don't know how that will affect long-term a scene.
I struggle with balancing the line of being candid and honest about my feelings, and even when they're undesirable, with knowing that young people look up to me. And so I don't want to be disingenuous about my struggles, but I also don't want to provide them with like a guidebook on suffering, if that makes sense.
We used to tell the teams, no matter how fucked up the poem you're about to spit is, it's still important to smile before you do it, because it lets people know at least you made it through it.
I'm only here because so many people worked and gave up of themselves. So for me, if I can walk into a space and facilitate that same sort of release or freedom and permission to write, that I never had until I walked into that poetry space. I feel like I'm selfish if I'm not giving that back.
Or I was told early that the best way to help yourself is to help people who do what you do.
I haven't accomplished everything that I wanted to accomplish as an artist. I definitely didn't accomplish everything that I wanted to accomplish as a slam poet. But when I look at my life as an artist, I'm proud of what I have done, and it means a lot because of those young people.
And I realized how badly I wanted them to be artists who didn't hate themselves.
I really think people are so scared of writing a poem because they don't see themselves as a poet, because that's not something they ever saw themselves in. Those stories have never reflected their reality. So to tell someone that their story is a primary text worthy of reading and worthy of mining for knowledge, like that is an amazing feeling to open that space up.
If I can get kids to listen to each other, if we can open up and have a conversation, I think that's just as valuable and just as memorable and just as powerful as any poem I've got.
You realize that all of these things that you think you were ashamed of, or that made you different, or that made you a freak, or that made you broken, like that, so many other people experience these things.
And the frustrating thing is you're not always sure if they get it. You're not always sure if they're listening.
A young poet like gets it when they come up in the front of the classroom to like read their first draft, and they're shaking and their voice cracks and they're obviously nervous, but they do it anyway.
I see someone who like wasn't always like as confident with their work or whatever go up and do a performance and see the reaction that they get from everybody, see like that support, and then they do this little like smile to themselves on stage right after their poem because they're like so pleased but so like shocked that it was like well received. I love seeing that.
Sometimes I'm just teaching them a dumb haiku, and then some people can really change their lives with it, you know?
The thing that I'm the most proud of is that the artists that I've worked with, the young people that I had a chance to mentor, they're all doing well in life. You know, like they're all doing well, like in life, they know who they are.
I'm now at a point where some of the kids that came through some of the programs that I developed when I first got started are grown and are like running things and are activists and grad students and PhD students and like curating.
You're doing all this stuff just trying to make sure that they know that regardless of what brought you here, like somebody loves you, somebody cares about you, and you got value. And you got something you got to do in this world. For them to feel that, and for them to be in a place where it's like, and to know that you're a part of that healthy place they're in, like it really helps me like with the work and moving forward.
I think each one of these kids are your poems, dude.
Yeah. I never thought about that. Each one of my students are my poems. Wow.
At age 5, I was adopted by a truck driver and became Buddy Marshall Stevens. What? I didn't much care for that. A number of reasons. So I changed it to Buddy Wakefield. My name is Buddy Wakefield. I am part saint, part fraud. Being human has been a largely humiliating experience. I would say it's been humbling. But I suspect humble people don't use that word. They humble up, Buttercup. We got ourselves some friendly names, don't we? We got ourselves in a pickle, friends. There are no stunt doubles performing the devastation in losing everything. Maybe we are losing everything on purpose. There's a good chance I'm a bad person trying to do something right. It turns out, y'all, everyone is right. It turns out we are happening so fast, the whole world so fast. Yesterday, I was 23. The day before that, I was 9, and none of the soured relationships were worth my need to be right. Happiness, it's too far to fall. And you, my love, you were a skyscraper tabernacle, mouthful of water, beautiful and too far to fall. Oh, but look at us take our tumble quick, yeah. Look at us take our lumps. Look, everybody's headed for the pass again to cut each other off. If my whole body, and if your whole body, if every single one of our bodies got amputated right now, we would still have to deal with what's left of us. everything we ever ordered. The waiter, who is very famous for telling stories to make people feel like they feel better than they actually do. He strutted up to our table, a cocky lion, walking straight into the mouth of a whale and said, "Put it in God's hands." I said, "Boy, we are God's hands. Stop standing like an apology you never meant to give. Your context is unruly." The waiter reached across my audacity, evenly placed the silverware, then politely replied, "Sir, you don't know me. You know a mistake I made. Now, who ordered the worst case scenario?" Maybe I did. Maybe you. Maybe on purpose, until everyone in the whole world found out everything we were ever terrified of being found out about, and no one was impressed with our nightmare air. It does not have an ego. Pay attention then, y'all, when it enters and exits. Each one of us feels desire inside them and can point to it on a map. Stop acting like you don't know which direction your life is going. It is hysterical, Atlanta, pretending to be something you're not. The loneliness is so goddamn blunt. Everything here on the ground is a trigger. Don't expect to be warned again. You are a full-grown jawbone, though I have zero proof that any of us are adults, but there is still a voice inside me that believes we will make miracles of the laughter left between us. Recently, I discovered a word that will fix everything I broke in our home, rescued it from my body, and passed it on to people who will use it properly. You finally leaned over to my ear, whispered so close to my throat it fogged up the knife. Spoke what you thought was my name until I could not remember where I came from. Then you patiently waited for me to explain what in God's crippled name I am even talking about. So I clenched your history and I pulled it on a repeat, and I loved you forever. While we all sang these words like a choir of honest killers, learning to leave the beast behind. If I go forth from this world without you, I did not forget to survive. The both of us.
Facing the truth, I think, is, people don't want to do that. They don't want to look in the mirror and really be with all of who they are.
I think being a poet can be a very selfish experience, and maybe not selfish, but self-interested.
It's always a constant tension that I had, that I was too much without ever saying a word, without ever doing anything.
I think one of the things people miss the most about people that's on stage, because we on there and we getting all that rah-rah, is they all assume that we're extroverts. I am a deeply introverted, very thoughtful, inward person.
My family always used to ask me why I was so quiet, why I never expressed my feelings, why I never talked to anybody, why I always acted happy, but they could tell there was more to it, but I just never felt comfortable speaking to people. And even to this day, I would say people get more out of me from my poems than they do almost in conversation sometimes.
I was tired of being told how to speak like a ... Yeah, and poetry was the place where my identity wasn't challenged.
And so I was really driven by just being a young woman, by being an angsty young woman who was in love and out of love and wanted to be radical and didn't know her own body and feminism and sexuality and identity. But I just wanted to be there. I just wanted to be this hip sort of. I wanted to be this young poet on stage, like being bold and being brave.
I don't find all this like angst and drama and stuff to write about in my life anymore. But there are still things that I can write fluidly and passionately about. But it's not like crying with like a bottle of wine, like I can't believe it. It's not like that messy emotional writing.
And now it's not that I lost that girl, but since over the past 10 years, I love poetry more than I love the act of performing it.
I recently had a friend who told me that they wanted to go back to recording themselves on a tape recorder so they can get back in touch with their own voice.
I think the more that I care for a poem, the more I craft it and the more I love it. It just doesn't go over the same way as those kind of, I'm 22 and just learning how to form something on a page.
It's when we live long enough that other people start telling us we're this or something else, or we start like adopting these different things that aren't what we genuinely are when we came here.
So much of my life has been asking the question, how honest can I afford to be? You know, how honest, how much of myself can I give without feeling like I've given myself away? And I think in recent years, for me, that's actually changed into like how honest can I not afford to be? Like, if I am constantly withholding myself from all of these spaces, and I've been taught to do this over the years, like, I don't have the luxury to kind of like oppress myself anymore for the people who don't want to see me.
Life is supposed to be hard, I feel like. If it weren't, you know, I think we idealize this whole idea of like a heaven and this perfect way of existing and being. But then to like, how exciting would that be?
I think a lot of the stuff that makes a good artist is the things that we endure. And people forget that endurance is also a superpower.
So many artists I know struggle with depression and anxiety because they're going through so much. And they can find a poem for him, her, them, you know, but they can't find the poem for themselves.
There's a point where diving into a piece of writing is more than just exposing yourself to the people who are going to hear the poem. It's exposing yourself to yourself.
I mean, because isn't that who we are? At the end of the day, we're just a bunch of misfits, not fitting in, being in places we're not supposed to be, fucking up the system.
Even from what I said earlier, it's bigger than just making someone feel something. Like, that made me feel like I could be something that mattered, and I hadn't ever felt that.
Even if it doesn't seem spectacular or special in any way, it is, because it's your life that you're living, and you're fortunate to take every breath.
There starts to be less and less excuses as to why I can't or shouldn't be doing something, because look at how many people who can't. Look at how many people are like suffering.
This is bigger than me. That storytelling is bigger than me and my career, and it's bigger than poetry. It's about connecting people, showing them that we all like suffer the same.
And that's what I want to be, as a teacher, as a poet, as a person. I don't want anybody to ever be able to feel like they were invisible around me.
I don't have time to do the work of shutting my own voice down for someone else's comfort.
Because I think we can get up a lot of times when we talk about what is and what is and what is and what was and what is, and nobody talks a lot about what the could be.
I'm going to write myself out of HIV. I'm going to write myself out of postpartum. I'm going to write myself out of poverty.
I want to be remembered for the work I do, not just who I am. I kind of want the poems and the work to have a life of its own. I want that to be remembered. Even if my name isn't attached to it, I think I would be super cool with it.
I want to be remembered as a man who used his work and his words to empower others and inspired people, including myself, to not just be a good artist, but to use your artistry to be a better person. If your artistry isn't making you a better person, you're not doing it right.
When the libation is poured, you know, during a event or a festivity or whatever it is, and I'm gone, I want many people to be able to pour water for me. You know, I want many people to be able to say that this person influenced me, not just my writing, but my life. You know what I mean? This person influenced how I thought about myself. You know what I mean? This person gave me, even if it was just one word that I could use every day of my life if I needed to.
I remember my first nationals, man. I met certain people that I've heard of and have seen, and I have listened to their CD. Like someone passed it down to me. And I'm like, oh man, this person's, moving. This person is amazing. And the way they write, they must care about people. And then I met them and they were just like, hey. And I'm like, I just want to let you know I'm a fan of your work. And they're just like, cool. And like walked away and I'm like, you seem to be such an open person. Now, I don't know. I mean, maybe because they're poets, they're a little sensitive. Like, I know as artists, we're pretty sensitive people.
Hey, but
and maybe I took it sensitively.
But if someone says you admire their work, you're going to show some appreciation or respect. Like, that's the problem you have. Like,
yeah, like...
Then they're like, oh, yeah, thanks. Like, I just
but
feel
but it's more like... And then there was another time they were just like, I just got dismissed. Almost like I'm not worth talking to. You know what I mean?
All the time.
And it's just like... Man, I looked up to you because you, in some way, your poems had saved my life or had got me through some rough times. And then I meet you. I guess maybe that works with every artist too, though. I mean, maybe that's how it is with maybe that's how it is with comedians. Maybe that's how it is with musicians. Maybe there's,
I'm sure it is with everybody. But when you think of poetry, right, you're thinking of something different. Like it's a commentary. It's personal. So when you get on stage and you're sharing something with yourself and then you find out that the person behind this poem isn't who the person is,
yeah,
you're like,
it's a little
disappointing. Man, what a fucking bummer.
Yeah, it feels like you got conned, right?
Yes.
Right? Like you feel like you're getting conned by people, by poets' works that that you really admire, and then suddenly it's like whatever.
I cheerlead so hard for others that I thought when things pop off for me, people would be equally happy. And I've learned that that is not the case. So the joy then becomes in celebrating quietly the small things.
Having the luxury now of being able to stay home. I take my kids to school every day, pick them up. That's dope to me.
I write about being a sexy ass bitch, all right? Because there's a lot of pretty motherfuckers out there that dress up and look cool, and that's not sexy. You know what's fucking sexy? Taking care of your family and making sure they have food on the table.
Like my daughter being proud of me means a lot.
My kids push me to write and push me to do business the way that I do it, push me to try to overachieve and leave them something in case I, for the day that I, part up out of here, say the deuces to this body, that they have something to hold on to.
My mother drove every part of why I do what I do. I just hope, like, if there's a fraction of her that's in me, that she gets to live through some of this shit.
It goes beyond the poetry. The reason is the poetry. But then once you get off stage and you can actually, walk into somebody's arms when they embrace you and say, man, that was a deep poem, man. I'm glad that you shared that. I went through something similar. And then you can become a friend with that person and you become, that to me is like the ultimate.
These are my friends. These are my family. These folks are true fans. I don't have anything else to prove to them. They believe in me.
And with that comes a heavy responsibility, right? Because why would you purposely hurt people who love you that much?
When there was tragedy in my life, poets were the ones that came to my aid.
I hope to never be an honest poet. I hope to always forgive faster than I write.
I just think it's amazing how we walk and we are just like a constellation of like magic orbiting each other and we don't even know it yet.
We're all pieces to the poem.
If poetry never becomes a billion-dollar industry, whatever the case may be, if we can continue to have a sense of community, a sense of kinship, a sense of understanding.
Our joys and sense of happiness comes from the relationship we have with other people. I don't believe you can sit on a mountaintop somewhere by yourself and really feel the depth of like human joy.
You can learn to be happy, but you can't learn to be joyous.
A good friend of mine, Ani DeFranco, said if you're not getting happier as you get older, you're fucking up.
Receiving these nods of appreciation is joy, pure joy, because I used to think that I was invisible.
I'm so happy to finally be in a place where I am really actually feeling the shoes of that ideal man that I always wrote towards being. That one who knew that if I just focused, kept my eye on the prize, on these ideals, whether that be politically or spiritually or familially, that I was inevitably bound to inhabit happiness, or vice versa, for happiness to inhabit me.
The last stage of the writing process for me is a real isolatory thing. Most times it's just me at midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning while everybody's already asleep, and I'm just sitting at my computer honing in on my poem. For me, this is the most important part of the writing process, and it demands my most focused concentration. Like, this is the part where I go through every single line and I'm making sure that I've written that line the best way I could possibly write it. I'm going through every single one of my imagery and making sure that it's painting the right picture that I want my audience to see. I'm going through every single one of my metaphors and making sure that it's original and it's something that people haven't heard before. If I don't do my job properly in this stage, then I will fail to execute the concept that I came up with. I feel like I'm there now. I feel like I've finished it. I think I've poured over it enough, and I've gone through every single line enough, and I think that I am putting my best foot forward now. I'm gonna share it now with an audience because I want to see, where they're reacting or where they're not reacting, or are they reacting the way I thought they're going to react. And once I can get that kind of a feedback, then I can go in and make some more edits. But as of right now, there's nothing like the feeling of typing in that last word and knowing that for now, this poem is done.
The average person doesn't really see life the way that we see life, to know that there truly is a poem in everything. You can turn anything into a poem. There's been a fly on this light over here for the longest. That's a poem.
Uncover the craft, right? Excavate the art, because it is everywhere. Poem is everywhere. Poem is in how we, outreach our hand to whomever for help. A poem is how we, suck our teeth. A poem is everywhere. So you have to be able to really employ language in a way that is yours as you tell this story.
That poem is on the bus, it's on your train ride, it's on that lonely plane ride when you're eating those salty pretzels on the plane. It is in that hotel room. It's in that moment when the audience is giving you everything they got. It's in that moment where you might be having the worst show of your life, but it's always there. There's always a poem.
And so when I think about writing poems, I think about drawing out what's on the inside. And I think we just have to be brave enough to be vulnerable enough to tell that story.
But you know what scares me about that too? Is I also don't want to find the perfect poem, because I worry that as soon as I do, then I'm just going to vanish from the planet.
So much of our culture teaches us to suppress our emotions, suppress our true desires, suppress vulnerability, man up, keep it together. And if you find the poem within you or within your community or within your life, I think that's opening yourself up to a higher version of yourself.
No matter how difficult an obstacle or phase of your life or situation in your life or circumstance can be, it means try to find the meaning of why you're going through this and how you overcoming the obstacles in your life can help other people.
I think it's finding the beauty in something in a moment in time that will help you remember what this whole human experience is.
But at some point, you're going to have to figure out who you are, what you've got to say, what you can bring uniquely to the table. because there's only the one you. You know what I mean? When you bring what's in you, your voice, you know, your stories, your understanding of the world, when you put that in a poem, you know, then you found the poem.
Find something in your everyday life that's extraordinary. And if there's nothing in your life that's extraordinary, find something to do with your life that can be extraordinary and run with it.
Find that place, find that thing, find out who you are, find out what you believe in, find out what you stand for, and you don't let anything or anybody move you off of that.
Finding that feeling where, you know, like my heart drops into my feet and there's like, you know, nothing that exists in me, but it's like every cell is made of goosebumps.
I have a tattoo on the back of my neck that says "By God." Like you have the author of the book. I feel like I'm one of the greatest poems ever written. That needs a little editing at times.
To give it all purpose, the reason I ever even started doing this, to process myself as a child, would just, to find it would be to arrive at the, and inhabit the happiness that I always knew was there and that I inherently was drawn toward. To find the poem, to find that which makes me happy.
Waking up and being next to your lover and your cat is sitting on top of you too, and you realize that you built a home somewhere far from where you grew up. There's a poem in that. Putting on clothes that makes you feel good, that makes you look good, that makes you look good to you at least. There's a poem in that. Being able to turn on the heat when you want to turn on the AC when it's hot, you know, to cook what you want to go out and honestly say, like, I can eat what I want. There's a poem in that. There's a poem in the suffering and not having that. There's a poem in not having anything, you know, and seeing someone not have anything and observing that. And sometimes everything is an observation, and there's poems in that. If you're looking, there's a poem, you know. What else is there?
Think back to when you were a child. And on the count of 3, yell out what you wanted to be when you grew up. All right, everybody. Ready? 1, 2, 3. What was yours? Gymnast. What was yours?
TV commercial director.
Nice. What was yours? Oh, me? I wanted to be a heart surgeon / architect / painter / ninja. What? That's a thing. Like, think about it. I would design and build a hospital where I worked, saving lives by day while assassinating them by night. Only the bad guys, obviously. Okay, fine, mostly. Then use the blood of those I've slain to paint beautiful landscapes on my porch every Sunday. Okay, that's disturbing, but it's totally doable. And I kept believing that until Maya, a 2nd grader, punched me in my 3rd grade stomach, and I let out such a loud scream I realized I would make the most horrible ninja ever, but that's okay, because I could still be a heart surgeon / architect / painter. And I kept believing that until Mrs. Mercutio, my high school counselor, told me my grades were as low as my parents' income, so I better think of something else besides med school. To this day, I wonder if she's still there, flicking off the light switch inside our children to keep them from being brilliant, but that's okay, because I could still be an architect / painter. And I kept believing that until my father, who's an architect, said it's really hard to find a job as an architect. Wait, no. And so they said artists will always starve. Wait, no. Until be realistic, until find stability, until I had no slashes left to keep tabs of all of my dreams. As children, we tied towels around our necks and flew off the coffee table, pointing to the spot where we needed to land to break our record. We drew pictures of ourselves, the astronaut / teachers, the ballet dancers / rock stars. I kept mine at the bottom of my drawer for safekeeping, only to find them last week, hidden beneath mortgage papers and credit card statements, and the work badge I used to enter the building of a job I never wanted. How much further was I willing to bury who I was meant to become just to live a life that's steady? How long have I managed to muffle those voices who tried to tell me steady is just the word we like to use anytime someone asks, how's your life? And we're too ashamed to give the actual answer. In 2006, my doctor looked me in the eyes and told me I had testicular cancer, to which I replied, yay, sounds like a ball. He didn't laugh. Instead, he says, you understand after we remove one testicle, you'll only have one testicle left. And I said, okay, then I'll change my name to One Hung Lo because I'm Asian. Still nothing. Instead, he says, it might be difficult to have children after this. You might want to consider having your sperm frozen before the surgery. And I said, great. I will never look at frozen yogurt the same way ever again. He didn't think any of my jokes were funny. But how could you not find that funny? You're talking about me, the guy who once had ambitions of doing big things and is now teaching telemarketing to students and retired bankers. The guy who was taught being a man meant being fully equipped, and now you want to come snip, snip, and separate the Wonder Twins? The guy who will later tell his friends, and they'll respond by texting him a picture of a wonton saying, hey, don't worry, we found you a replacement. The guy who's already so skinny that those automatic doors at the grocery store can't detect me and I have to wave my arms and jump like a madman until it opens. And now you're saying I may have to go through chemo, which will make me skinnier than I already am. Damn, how is that not hilarious? Yeah, you might not find that funny, Doc, but I can guarantee you that whoever's piloting my fate decided to raid the minibar, lock the cockpit doors, and is hysterically pissing their pants by now. Have you ever wondered why maniacal laughter is never included in the stages of grief? Maybe because it doesn't last that long. Maybe it's just the parentheses, nestled between denial and anger, hold the grin between my clenched teeth, long enough to get the hell out of his office so I can cry on the shoulders of my car seat. How did I get here? I've never been one to go rogue and write my life past the margins. I once made billboards of my milestones and staggered them along my road to success, and now I'm wondering at what point did I lose the concrete beneath my steps. Maybe it's when my parents took that first flying exit out of their marriage. Maybe it's when I took that detour out of college, thinking there had to be a faster way, only to find myself going in circles until the student loan light started blinking. Maybe I got tired of running on empty. Maybe it's why I took that desk job that promised me my own corner office. Maybe I couldn't tell if it was the tie or the slow death strangling my neck, working long hours paying for a degree I never got. Maybe that's what led to this. Laying on the hospital bed, my eyes towards the God I was told was a God of promise, asking, are you laughing yet? Do you not see this? The heavy-handed nurse pushing the needle in and out of my skin, failing to find a vein for the IV. The machine's beeping like an SOS distress signal, like maybe this is it for me. The rock bottom ending spent from a life spent falling. How funny that the last words I'll ever hear is a doctor saying he'll do his best to make the scar as minimal as possible, as if my prayers resided on that. I don't remember anything after. I just remember the fade to black. But I do remember this. Just before the darkness engulfed me like a confession booth, just before the anesthesia grabbed me by the veins to drag me to my sleep, I heard a voice say, don't you see, this is your out. Because how can you ask to be molded into the person you're meant to be and then question how it's being done now? And when I woke up, I found myself here, standing on this stage, performing a poem where I get to say I'm now 15 years cancer-free. I've got a sexy battle scar slash beneath my belly. Oh, and remember what they said about me not being able to have children? Well, I should also mention I now have a son much more perfect than any poem that can ever come from me. My son who hides fruit snacks in the crevices of the couch and eats them again 2 days later. My son who has this weird thing about placing stickers over his nipples. My son who gets to pick out a book for us to read before he goes to bed and eventually figured out that the longer the book, the longer he gets to stay up. No, I will not read you the entire Twilight trilogy. Now, put that back in mommy's drawer before you ruin it. My son who, actually wait, stop the music for a sec. So my son's finally potty trained, right? And the other day, this dude was on the toilet, like doing his business, right? And when he finished, I kid you not, this kid yells out, Alexa, I'm done. I'm like, no, dude, Alexa doesn't do that. My son, who manages to leave Legos on the floor in the exact same spot I'll be walking in the middle of the night. So when the top of those Antichrist toys meets the bottom of my holy foot, I have to hold my mouth to silence the screams, because if I wake him, he won't go back to sleep for the rest of my life. If you think I'm overreacting, let me ask you, have you ever stepped barefoot on Legos? Trust me, it hurts a lot more than having a testicle removed. But I still let him have them, because every time we put a new Lego set together, he immediately takes it apart and rearranges all the pieces. And when I tell him that's not how it looks in the picture, he responds by saying, it's okay, this way is better. Sometimes fate has a way of dismantling our lives to tell us it's okay, this way is better. May we all be rearranged and rebuilt like that. May the billboards of our plans be shredded by the wind, so I'll ask you again. Think back to when you were a child and the answer you gave when someone asked what you wanted to be when you grew up. Think of how quick that answer came, held together by slashes before the world tried tearing them apart. Yeah, we may no longer want what we wanted back then, but it doesn't mean our hearts are meant to settle for something we don't want now, because somewhere you're 6 years old, still filling in the blanks with all the things you've ever wanted to be. You that could be firefighter slash veterinarian, you that could be superhero slash fashion designer, you that could be master chef slash PlayStation gold medalist, you the wide-eyed wanderers with your gaze towards the horizon, you with the impossible mountains to climb. Do it for the gram, bring your slash back, place in between everything that makes up who you are, whoever that might be. Claim the amazing you've become and drop all the which no longer fits you. Me, I am Asia Sampson, writer slash performer slash cancer survivor slash husband slash father slash professional napper. No, I never became an architect, but I found much more joy in building people up. No, I never became a heart surgeon, but I try to write poems that cut through the chest and get to what's broken. And no, I never became a ninja. Actually, that's not true. I'm totally a ninja. I'm like the most awesome ninja, fighting my best fight when the darkness comes. So tell the world to keep an eye out, because somewhere I'll be lurking, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And when I do, I promise you will never see me coming.
All right, truth. This documentary is not at all what I envisioned. You know, when I had the idea for this project, I had this ambitious goal that I was going to write this 10-minute poem. I was going to document the entire process. I was going to speak to my favorite poets, learn from them, and at the end of it all, create the perfect 10-minute poem. And by all accounts, I did follow that process, but is the poem perfect though? I don't think so. In fact, I don't even think I made it to 10 minutes. I mean, don't get me wrong, I enjoyed the process. I think it's one of the best things I've ever written in a long time, and I had fun writing, memorizing, and performing a poem for that long, but whether or not it's perfect, I think I was setting myself up for something that didn't even exist. But you know what's funny though? What's funny is that as I was interviewing people and as I was editing this together, I began to realize that the poem I was writing was not the 10-minute poem. The actual poem was this documentary. 30 poets speaking about their craft, talking about their process, giving their insight to this art form to which we've dedicated our lives. That is the poem. The perfect poem, written by 30 imperfect people. So to me, finding the poem is about going out into the world full of questions, but not having an expectation of what those answers should be. Finding the poem is allowing the poem to find you, but in order for that to happen, you have to be attuned. Your eyes have to be open, your ears have to be open, your heart has to be open to whatever it is the world is trying to say. And you just sit down, shut up, and listen. And when it's done talking, you take all that you've heard, filter it inside of you, and then use that to create something. I hope I never lose the ability to do that. I hope that I am always receptive and that I am always the vessel for whatever it is the world is trying to say. And I hope I have the humility to just take all that in and produce something amazing without my ego or without me thinking I have to have it a certain way. And I also hope that whatever it is that I create is just a catalyst for someone else to create something of their own. That's my hope for you. I hope that you find your own poem. I hope that you are always receptive, and I hope you don't get in your own way. But my biggest hope is that you carry with you that spirit to always be looking and to always be searching. Yeah, that's it.
You can't talk about how poetry gets you laid.
No, we're not going to talk about how poetry gets you laid.
So I've never gotten laid from poetry.
And neither have I. That's like
We started.
Wait, first, do I look in the camera?
No, because you know, if you look at the camera, it creeps people out sometimes when you do this and you talk to them.
You want me to stare in the camera?
Like, don't look at the camera, and then you'd be like
this.
Poetry. Wait, not looking at you.
Okay. What up, Aisha? What up, boy? Yeah. Which list am I?
Do you like the open color? I also brought a tie.
To me, poetry means that you can rhyme words.
I got nervous.
Hang out, like.
Yeah, I know how to tell a story.
Who wants to write a poem without the word moon in it? Who wrote the book, There No More Poems About the Moon? That's just the worst title ever.
Oh my God! Oh my shit! Oh my God!
I think Carlos Robeson is supremely overrated, and I wouldn't believe anything he says on this documentary.
Carlos Robeson is watering down the scope of this project.
I'm not signing any release forms until you prove to me that you have the kind of budget that can flatten this out in post-production.
Chapstick. I don't want my lips to get ashy in the video.